big sky, big potential. In association with Mills and Reeve, this is Eastern Promise. Achieving more together. Welcome to 2026 and to the podcast that brings you the very best of the east of England. Across towns, cities, counties, sectors, it's all here and loaded with Eastern Promise. I'm Mike Rigby, and this week we're looking at the Oxford-Cambridge corridor. It's receiving global attention, including a spiffy investment prospectus from the government. Ooh. The Oxford-Cambridge Supercluster Board is working to make this opportunity a reality, and I'll be talking to Board Chair Andy Williams and Board Member Dan Thorp of Cambridge Ahead to get a sense of progress and the opportunities that lie ahead. So let's start as we mean to go on. Damn the torpedoes of torpor and slam the enthusiasm engine to full throttle, 'cause this is Eastern Promise. To describe the potential of the Oxford-Cambridge corridor and the opportunities within, the UK government uses the following superlatives. Ahem. World-leading. Vibrant. Innovative. Globally renowned. World-class. And that is just in the first paragraph. Any project of this scope, which has huge implications for both the corridor itself and the many ecosystems beyond, needs both a trusted interlocutor in government and a single united voice drawn from business, communities and academia. In Lord Vallance, Sir Patrick Vallance, hero of the pandemic, anyone who saw him speak at the Innovate Cambridge Summit knows we undoubtedly have the former. And in my guests today, we have the latter, Dr. Andy Williams, chair of the Oxford-Cambridge Supercluster Board, along with board member Dan Thorp, who's also chief executive of Cambridge Ahead. But what, you might ask, is the Supercluster Board? What's its purpose and who is represented? What a great question. And here to explain are Andy and Dan, recorded in the Glass House, home of Innovate Cambridge.
We're going to dig into the Oxford-Cambridge Supercluster Board, the Oxford-Cambridge corridor. We're going to find out where things stand, and we're going to share all the things that are exciting, that are coming up, and how we can all support the board in getting these things done. So, Andy, do you want to introduce yourself to the two people and a dog who may not know about the Oxford-Cambridge corridor and your role within?
So I am chair of the Oxford-Cambridge Supercluster Board, and that is a group of mainly science and technology businesses, investors in science and technology, and the 10 universities across the whole of the Oxford-Cambridge region.
And Dan Thorpe, this will be your third or fourth appearance? Third appearance. He's keeping count. This is good. Third appearance on the Cambridge, not the Cambridge Ahead podcast. Although, you know, talk to me if you want to have one. What is the name of the thing I do? Eastern Promise podcast. That's the one. And you're very welcome. But for the very few people who don't know you and don't know what you do and don't know what Cambridge Ahead is, just fill us in.
Well, thanks for having me back, Mike.
God, any time.
Day job is Cambridge Ahead. We're a voice for the Cambridge City region economy, made up of large employers across the economy. And Andy has asked me to be on the Oxcam Supercluster Board. So I also sit on the Supercluster Board with a particular role looking at how the supercluster can form relationships with other clusters around the UK.
You brilliantly provided me with a fascinating report. I mean, I'm still kind of stuck on Diane Coyle's foreword about how the Treasury approaches these things, and sort of read that if you really, really want to get angry. So, Andy, at the risk of asking you a question that will be almost, redundant and obsolescent within seconds of me asking it, Where do things stand now in terms of the Oxford-Cambridge corridor? Is it a corridor or an arc? Are we arcing or are we corridoring?
I think we worry too much about the name of it, and probably we should be worrying more what a supercluster is, what a cluster is, really.
Better question.
So let me give you a bit of background. So this has come about ages ago. Let's go do a bit of history. So back in 2010, 2015, National Infrastructure Commission identified the Oxford-Cambridge region as an area which would grow other than the fact it had poor infrastructure. In other words, it has all the basic ingredients. It has science and technology, has the right skill sets, has the right universities. And the main thing holding it back was just basic stuff like, at the times, road and rail, now water and power. So they're all things that were holding it back. And if those things could be released, you would get increase in productivity, because the sort of businesses that would grow in that region then are the ones which are most productive. So that's where we were back 10, 15 years ago. So where we are now, really, is we know we have Oxford and Cambridge, the first and fifth, or certainly both within the top five most innovative cities per capita in the world, both still constrained, but with huge potential. And so we need both Oxford and Cambridge to grow significantly over the coming years. But if you look at where Oxford and Cambridge sit in terms of size and scale, I think Cambridge is the 69th biggest cluster in the world, and Oxford, I think, is 77th biggest cluster in the world. But you put them together into a single region of 3.5 million people, which is what you get if you join Oxford and Cambridge together, and you deliver the sort of changes that we need, you end up with a cluster which is in the top 10 in terms of scale. So then you have two global universities in the top 5 and a cluster which is in the top 10. And then you are globally competitive and you can compete for investment from across the world. That's fundamentally what it's about, and that's where we are at the moment.
I mean, it's a really exciting concept, because I was just in the conversation we've just had in a previous recording around the beginner's guide to Cambridge, Milton Keynes came up. And Milton Keynes obviously is it sort of equidistant, smack in the middle? Pretty
much. In my mental model is you have Oxford and Cambridge, and then in the middle you have Bedford and Milton Keynes, and then you're told not to forget Northampton and Peterborough, who are also theoretically part of the arc as well. And as you'll find as we go on to this discussion, the supercluster is more of a concept than a geographically bound region. It's how do we bring investors, businesses and universities together to create more innovation and create value for the UK economy. I mean, it's such a powerful narrative. And as you say, it might not be a firm thing we can nail down geographically, but it is a fantastic narrative concept, which I think is probably why it's attracting so much attention to that. I mean, just Dan, if you just bring in quickly, well, not quickly actually, Dan, if you could just bring in the other clusters. So you provided me that report, and a link to all the reports we mentioned and the documents and whatever will be in the notes to the podcast. But I mean, tell me what your particular focus about your particular focus in terms of all those other clusters. I mean, is that like a global look, or is that very much sort of around sort of onshoring and making sure that these things stay within the orbit, or just stop me talking and say something?
So the report you're talking about is called Connected Clusters.
Yes, thank you.
And that's the point, really, is that the innovation economy in particular is connected. You know, it's connected in the corridor we're talking about, the supercluster that Andy was just mentioning, but it's connected across the UK, and you could scale that internationally as well. And the point, that might sound like a very obvious thing to say, the point about needing to talk about it is national policy has struggled really to see it in that way. You talk about Diane's foreword in the report at the beginning. National policy under different governments has tended to see regional or local growth as either a zero-sum game, so if one place grows, another place doesn't, or even if it's not quite as extreme as a zero-sum game, still in quite a hyper-competitive sort of way, places are bidding against each other for government funding. Yeah. And that's completely at odds with how the innovation economy works, which is all about collaboration, relationships, partnerships. So the connected clusters thing, ideology, is really to talk about that and to try and bring that more into the way that the policy system sees this and the way in which policy system works to help places to grow. So if we think about it in the Oxford to Cambridge corridor context, that's really exciting for things like the relationships between Oxcam and the northern corridor that the government is currently talking about. But it's also really exciting for places like the east, where you have the proximity to Oxcam is a massive opportunity. So you think about the way in which, companies from this part of the Oxcam corridor are collaborating with firms across the east of England, or even moving, companies that might move from Cambridge to Norwich, because that's...
Bug biome being one recent example.
Yeah, exactly. So in the bug biome example, that made sense for their scale-up journey. Cambridge was the right place to start up. Norwich is the right place to scale. And that is a connected cluster way of seeing the innovation economy rather than a competitive way of seeing different places.
I think from Lou Cordwell of the University, formerly of Unit M and the University of Manchester, I took a very strong lesson when I interviewed her about the Cambridge-Manchester link, which was the era of competition is over. And that's kind of stuck with me, that collaboration is a much more powerful tool to achieve your objectives than is competition. I'm not saying competition hasn't got a place, but it always seems to me that collaboration is always the better way to go. Because it's such an exciting concept, I've got the investment prospectus to hand for the government, and you've got that government interest, which is a bit like having I don't know how heavy a big hippo is, but it's pretty heavy, wander in and kind of sit down, and you can't ignore it. So just talk me through exactly how kind of a week in the life of the Supercluster Board works, and I'm just interested to see where you fit into this, because you're so obviously a vibrant and active part of it.
Well, I think for the longest time, and sometimes with many others, and sometimes almost on our own, we are the champions for that regional concept. The idea that if you can create that wider connected region, then you're attractive to global investors. And when I say global investors, it's slightly partly saying, and to the global investors who are already here, who are still making choices about whether to invest here or to overseas, and they want to see this wider framework. So a lot of the work we've been doing, and we have more friends than we did, is it starts with promotion and attraction. What you'll have seen over the last few years, both through the previous administration, Conservative, and now through the Labour administration, is actually a quite strong financial commitment to the region. East-West Rail, which is already running-ish between Oxford up to Milton Keynes, got another £2.5 billion in the comprehensive spending review, but that's barely talked about. £400 million came to Cambridge in the recent budgetary announcements, or just before. 100 million went to restore the Cowley line in Oxford. But not an awful lot is said about it. So you've now got the Economic Investments Prospectus, which is the first attempt there's been to actually describe the region as a region. But having said that, there is no regional organisation front door to the region at all at the moment. The only way you can get into the region in that context is to work through central government and the corridor champion, who is Patrick Vallance. Mm-hmm. But there is no local governance infrastructure at the moment in our region. So we work more closely with the strategic transport body, England's economic heartland. You've got Transport East in the east, so they talk to each other. So you've got England's economic heartland. We've got the Arc University Group, who are now part of the Supercluster Board, which covered the universities, and we talk quite closely with the East-West Rail. They're the local parties that do exist, but the lack of a local government body is noticed, even though they're represented on East-West Rail and Economic Heartland. So we have now appointed Rob Bridge, who's the CEO of the Combined Authority, to be an observer on our Supercluster Board. So we haven't forgotten the fact that it needs to have a local element to it. But that's where we're looking for more support in the future. We have an economic prospectus, we have great central government support. So most of my day job is actually just demonstrating what the government is doing and the huge potential and opportunity that linking Oxford and Cambridge together provides. To come back to your Milton Keynes point, we produced a prospectus at the beginning of the year, or a report, which demonstrated, it's a big number, 78 billion growth in the economy between now and 2035 across the corridor. It's very difficult to put that into number. What does that mean? It's a very big number, and obviously it contributes to economic growth. But what was interesting about that was it was equally balanced between Oxford, Cambridge and Milton Keynes. And that actually reflects the fact that although, so Oxford and Cambridge are both quite small, and so bang way above their weight, but actually from an overall perspective, Milton Keynes Bedford contribute the same level of GVA as Oxford and Cambridge do in this new model once they're joined up.
I mean, we've got Universal.
And the Universal theme park as well.
It's going to be, huge. I mean, look at all the opportunities there, not just for construction, but, hosting.
Yeah, they see themselves as a science and technology company. Those rides don't invent themselves. There's an awful lot of creativity goes into Universal, which is not actually... One of the things you mustn't get away from is we know that not everybody is going to be employed in science and technology in the region. I think, one, that would be difficult to achieve. Two, can you imagine what a world would be with every single person being in science and technology? You'd all go mad. You need the people who do the regular jobs and all the support roles.
Fundamental, though. You're so right. It cannot exist without the ancillary.
Yeah, I guess the reason the government's so interested in this, and actually the businesses who locate here, is undoubtedly the science and technology companies bring high-quality jobs and they're highly productive. Highly productive is a shorthand for the government gets more revenue out of it. But you're right, the spin-off benefits for that, for the wider economy, for everybody within the area is absolutely there.
To go back to a conversation that I had earlier, I was talking about Manchester having a free bus around the centre. This is a bit of a segue, but it will make sense in a minute. And I know Iowa, a city in Iowa, have just extended the free bus because they noticed the economic difference it made. In terms of reduced congestion, you're giving people a chance to get jobs, at all levels, which means paying taxes, which, all flows back in, and they think, oh, this is actually... it's the same with the 4-day week. It actually, you might sniff at it and it seems ridiculous, but then you actually look at the results it gets. And we are getting slightly off the point now. We'll bring us back in a second. But, it all feeds in. So
I can extrapolate for you from that one.
Oh,
so another area we're looking at very close. So attraction and promotion is what I spend a lot of time doing. Or that's what we're trying to work with in government. And we'll have a plan, we've got an economic prospectus, and we're going to build on a second version of that to make it more wide. Another area we're looking at very closely is skills and employment, because that's what underpins all of it. And also, it's got to be relevant to local communities. Now, this is something that would normally largely be led by local government, but to do it across the wider region when there isn't a local government construct is something we've taken on as well. And actually, I'll just bring you back to your bus theme. One of the main reasons that young people don't have access to science and technology jobs is not because of their education, it's because of access. And actually buses and just being able to get to the place where these roles are is really, really important. And so you need to consider that as part of this as well. So we come back to the fundamental of East-West Rail, which is what underpins the Oxford to Cambridge arc. It can't just be about a railway line. It needs to be about that last mile connectivity by understanding what journeys people want to take, maintaining people can get from X to Y in a time period which is relevant, and also to ensure that young people can get from where they are to where the opportunities are.
So is that part of the way we start to... Basically, if you imagine sort of a pipeline between Oxford and Cambridge, a literal pipe, and you sort of put liquid in it, hold it up, and it all flows along the pipe. Is that what you're describing, the start of the way we kind of spread the good stuff, if I can be facile about it, out of Oxford and Cambridge and along that corridor? Or is that already existing? It's just a matter of literally drawing people's attention. Look at this.
Well, we've got that. So another work stream is looking at the spatial organisation of the region and actually understanding what companies are already in there and what they actually do. So there's a strong element of that, and that's what Dan's building on the clusters in the rest of the UK as well, is understanding how the businesses are already working with each other. So that's a very strong element of it. But I think you can get quite schizophrenic rightly about this. So what I described at the beginning as, yes, we need to grow Oxford and Cambridge because of the benefits of agglomeration. And then I'm saying, well, we need it across a much wider region because we need the benefits of scale as well. So you can get quite schizophrenic about it. Undoubtedly, this railway line between Oxford and Cambridge releases hundreds of thousands of existing homes which are then commutable to Oxford or Cambridge.
Yeah.
That's one of the benefits, but it cannot be the only benefit. The benefit has to be that we start to build capability in parts of the region which currently don't have it, so that people have access to jobs closer to home as well. So you've got to get the benefits of agglomeration, and you've got to get the benefits of scale, and that's the ultimate aim of the supercluster. And that scale could be UK scale.
I'm a big fan of things working in incremental steps, and I've seen this work in a few places now, where an organisation doesn't shoot for the moon, or a local authority or a university doesn't shoot for the moon. It sets up small let's take dentistry an example, and University of Suffolk, because I always come back to that one. They set up a small little unit there, nothing as big as a dental school, but that's allowed them to sort of say, we do this, we can do this much more. And then the government said, yeah, it's not that expensive, we'll do it. So they step forward a bit, and the process repeats until, what do you know, they're huge. Is that the sort of thing we might consider? Because I'm just really interested, and I'll ask Dan with his experience, at Cambridge Ahead, the same question in a minute. I'm just really interested in the point you made about kind of there's no sort of supervisory local government body because the number of regions and counties and what have you that it passes through are, they're not huge numbers, but they are significant in terms of not necessarily all standing together in one sense, like the East of England.
So I'll be schizophrenic again. I think the big global companies, and actually a lot of the investors as well, are looking for stability and continuity, and so actually having a strategy they can all get behind and understand and see the value and benefits to them is really, really important. So you're right, it doesn't have to be any particular governance construct, but it needs to be something which allows there to be stability. But I'm sure Dan will say the same thing. If you've got an organisation, they want to see results now. So anything which can show a short-term win and can show you the direction you're heading in is definitely worthwhile as well. So practical examples of progress are really, really important. But most big global organisations are looking in 5 to 10 year time horizons and making big investment decisions on that basis.
I mean, are you, Andy Williams, our front door to the Oxcam arc?
I would say at the moment it's Patrick Vallance, who is an extraordinary individual in many ways. What you'll have seen in the Westminster Hall debate on Oxcam just a couple of days ago, that we are suggesting that there should be a single body probably sitting under Patrick Vallance, very much like his vaccine task force. And that actually talks to your first point about we need to show progress now and quite quickly, and gaining momentum on these huge, big, complex issues is difficult. We're seeing good progress, for example, the Cambridge Growth Company under Peter Freeman. Neil Coleman's about to release a report for the Oxford area as well. So we're starting to see some momentum. The momentum's really important as well. So I wouldn't say tactical. I wouldn't say it's quick tactical things. You need to demonstrate momentum and you need to demonstrate consistency.
So Dan, in your experience of dealing with local government and indeed national government, what do we? I just find this a really interesting thing to pick up, because quite often there are those stories there. It's just a question of being aware of them and being able to pull them together and to create that narrative. And it's that, you're so right, it is the sense of momentum that things are happening, and it's a really interesting thing to try and create, and it's a really exciting thing to try and build. But sorry, Dan, I'm sort of drifting away from the question already, but how do you think we should, in your experience, how is progress to be made?
So I agree a lot with the momentum point. I think one of the really compelling things about all of this is the kind of industry-led nature of a lot of what's happening across the supercluster and the Oxcam region, and how that, and credit to Andy for a lot of this, how that has led to the significant, the weight of government support that you've been talking about, Mike. And so momentum is now there, I think, and maintaining that is really important. And a phrase that I heard on the radio the other day that I've been using quite a lot, which I think is what momentum needs to translate into, is corporate mojo. The decisions that investors are taking, the decisions that employers are taking about, where to grow, where to employ people, where to conduct their research. The momentum that I think we've started to see now, this year in particular, around the Supercluster Board, the natural translation of that is into corporate mojo, the decisions that boards are taking. And that ultimately is what leads to the success that we're talking about, the GVA, the economic growth. So it's really important, I think, to connect those things. And in terms of the kind of the government engagement, national government, local government, one of the things we found in the Cambridge context is really powerful and helps a lot. It's just having a good, solid understanding of what's going on from data, but the voice of business, the voice of industry, bringing that world together with the policy world, the government world, and kind of from that forging forward with some really powerful things.
I mean, I have to say, I read through, I hope this is still current, the Supercluster Board's document, Policies to Kickstart Knowledge-Intensive Economic Growth. And I read just number 1, make the Oxford-Cambridge region the crown jewel of European science and innovation. And I went down the list, and the only word I say is, yeah, absolutely, yeah. That's 2 words. Yes, definitely, yes. So, I think you've and the NPPF, just to your point, in a very minor way, I used to work, my boss had a 10-minute rule, but Private Members Bill turned into actual legislation, which meant I got sent to lots of meetings in DCLG, as was, to discuss the positioning of commas and semicolons in legislation and the moving of the word, the really important difference between but, and or, and all that kind of wonky jazz. And it's not a totally negative relationship. A lot of positivity can flow from that if you think you're all approaching from the same angle. But Andy, one of the things I wanted to ask you is would it be within your remit to not just potential investors, show and tell potential investors the benefits of being located on the corridor/arc, whatever you want to call it, but also to champion those that do, so that they know and feel like they've signed in to they understand what an active ecosystem they've actually signed into.
Absolutely, 100%. I think how people come into the region is really important, and how they're treated on that journey getting in. And actually, again, that's something that central government have set up teams to try and onboard people into the region. The one that I see done less well, actually, is what you see around both Oxford and Cambridge particularly, is acquisition by an overseas company or a global company. What we do less well is onboard that new global company into the region in which they've moved into, and so that's a gap in our knowledge which we should be doing. We often bemoan the fact that our companies get bought. Actually, that's part of an active market. There's things you can do to change that, but it's okay being bought by a company if that progresses your science and progresses your value to your investors. But we then have a whole new opportunity of attracting that global investor to put even more in, and I think we miss that as a gap.
So how do we address that? I mean, the floor's open. Just jump in and say what you want to say. I mean, how do we address that? I mean, I'm just keen to explore solutions.
I think recognising it is a good starting point. I actually think that is where local government could actually spend more of their time. Is actually they understand the companies that have been acquired. They also understand there's a new company come in, and again explain to them what their local strategies are and what their local impact is probably as important as national government getting involved. National government's great because it tends to have links right out to the rest of the globe. It's less good when it comes to some of the very more detailed, challenges that organising the granular detail. And that's when I found one of my past roles was being AstraZeneca into Cambridge. And because it was just the biggest company, we very quickly got a very good relationship with the local councils. And I say councils with the S at the end because there was many local councils, but they appointed a single person smartly to look after who I could work with directly.
Smart, yes.
And they would help me do all sorts of things, and it involved having to go to the Department of Education, local education providers. We needed some transport solutions, all sorts of things that was coming up as part of an organisation, and we were guided through all of that in the early days of AstraZeneca's move. And great credit to our local councils that they did a pretty good job at it, because it was they hadn't realised how quite big a move it was in the end, with our 4,000 employees across the area. And fair credit to them. That's a good model of everyone pulling together and working for a single goal. But that was a very big, spectacular, high visibility move. We often see acquisitions in the Cambridge area where it sort of happens and people know it's happened. Everyone celebrates the amount of money that was acquired as a consequence of being acquired, but they don't then necessarily look after the company who was the acquirer. Is sometimes seen as a bad thing. That they've taken value away, and somehow you need to find a better relationship with them. So I'd like to see more of our local growth activity focused on those acquiring companies.
Well, it's interesting you raised that, because one of the things that I was looking at in the research I was able to do was sort of going through. You've got the prospectus, you've got the Cambridge Growth Company's recent document that Peter Freeman was kind enough to send to me. You've got obviously the CPCA have just approved their local growth plan, and other the same for other parts of the region. You've got the MK City Plan 2050 and the many plans of Bedfordshire. And I'm just interested, do they sit in some kind of hierarchy for you, or do you have a shelf groaning with these documents or are you going to get AI to basically take all these and create this kind of overall plan for me with the national ones at the top and sort of going down the hierarchy? How do you navigate this?
That was one of the questions you sent. You sent 2 or 3 questions before we started, and that's when I looked at it. I thought, oh God, what am I going to say? and you know what? The reality is, in my role, we basically sort of look at them, we sort of scan them. We don't always read them, because what we do is we go back with our value proposition. If you want to work with investors and global businesses and universities, what can we work on together? Rather than me trying to adapt everything I do to all these different documents, which are just so bloody complicated, you can't do it. But I will come back to one of the themes, and we were discussing before we started about Devo deals for Norfolk and Suffolk, more local money held locally. And we've seen through something called the LIP, which you may not have seen, the Local Innovation Prosperity Fund, local authorities have to bid for that, and they're bidding competitively with other regions and other geographies. So for me, although we just talked about the importance of local decision-making and local knowledge, the thought there's going to be lots and lots more small parcels of money all saying how they're going to spend it and how business has to interact with them. I'm just going to go back and say business hasn't got time to do that. They need a single, consistent strategic story for the whole of the UK, because if you're a global organisation, you've got under 100 different countries to worry about. They're not going to spend their time marching around 15, 20 different authorities, when really what they're looking for is what Dan's already talked about and working on, is they work by capability. So one of your questions is, where should activities happen? Companies look for where the globally competitive activities are. Yeah. They're not interested in geography, particularly they see the UK as a single place. And the stability of the UK in terms of its university systems, its taxation, the stability of government are the things they look for. And then when someone says to you, come and invest in little geography X or Y, it's just the wrong starting point. They want to invest in something which has capabilities that they think will help support their business growth. And so they always start off in completely the wrong place. This is the growth plan for place X, Y, and Z, and you should invest in here. You should start with, these are the capabilities we have. These are the capabilities, and almost not mention where the place is. But everything is set up to do the opposite.
Is that perhaps, Dan, if you know better than me, and that's highly likely, is that perhaps a function of the fact that nothing can really happen on the ground, in terms of breaking ground specifically, without a local authority being involved? I know that secretaries of state, have got recovery and calling in powers, and if Matthew Pennycook or Patrick Vallance or whoever want to make things happen, they can call it in or recover it, and judicial reviews aside, they can just ram it through. But you're exchanging looks now, and I think I might string into a dangerous area.
I think for me, the trick is, as Andy says, what businesses, investors will look at will be the fundamentals of a proposition, of a place. And what they will cite as their frustrations or challenges or the things that constrain their future growth potential will also be the same things. We were both at a business roundtable earlier this week where, when government was asking businesses what would you like to see, whatever the business was, they were all saying more affordable housing, better connectivity. So for me, the trick is on the policy side of things. There will always be some version of the complexity that you're describing. It might shift and might change, but that is the policy system. The trick is getting it to respond to the things which businesses cite as their constraints to growth, and they will be the same things in most often, more times than not, they will be the same things. So the trick to pull off, in my view, is to work with that system to point it at the things that are really going to make a difference and matter. And in this context, they are things like the railway, reservoirs, new towns, the things that are happening through the Oxcam growth corridor.
And so how do we do that? Is that the $60 million question or $100 million question? Or
I think the thing we're always wrestling about is local accountability and decision making, because they're best informed on how to do it, and the fact that has to be done within the context of local politics and local government. So ideally, we like those decisions to be made where they can be. But I don't think central government can ram things through. But what they can do is make sure decisions are taken more quickly or with greater momentum. So if a scheme shouldn't be going ahead, it shouldn't be going ahead. But you shouldn't be taking 5 to 10 years to make that decision. And there are examples in the Cambridge area where it's taken 5 to 10 years, and we still haven't got to the start of construction schemes. So that can't continue because it's not within any sort of framework of any investment decision that a business is going to make. And so we need to find a way of speeding up the planning system without losing the ability of local residents and local politicians to identify the problems with those schemes. But things taking 5 to 10 years is just unacceptable. It just doesn't work. It's completely irrelevant to any business decision.
There's an inherent short-termism built into the world of government. Because elections mean, whether at a national or local level, the people change, priorities change, decisions change, and that inherent short-termism that you get in government is a problem for the sorts of things we're talking about and for business. So again, one of the things that I think is really quite powerful about how this version of the Oxcam corridor, the supercluster, has brought itself together is that industry-led version of this, which can, I think, through the sorts of voices that Andy and I are involved in, provide more consistency and long-termism.
Absolutely.
Sort of sitting above and bridging the short-termism that is inbuilt into how government works.
So before I ask a final question, which is another potentially big one, what I want to ask you both is this: what have I missed? What have we missed in this conversation? What haven't I asked you that I should ask you and that you want people to understand? Because obviously I have my own slightly puppy-esque enthusiasm about the whole thing, and let's go, action this day kind of thing, which is not always the way to go, and runs the risk of infuriating people who are working very hard, as I've found in my life. But have we missed anything that's important in this conversation so far?
I think for me, the one thing we need to think about, so our report showed 78 billion growth by 2035. That comes with 100,000 jobs. By 2050, we think we need 400,000 jobs. And the debate we had, which I think is important, is the initial assumption that the majority of those roles would come either from international recruitment, because you needed global leaders, or from recruitment from outside of the region, based on the fact there aren't enough houses in the region, we're never going to get them built in time. And yet I really think that fundamentally this has to be about the community and community benefits. So one of the strong focuses we have, and we have a conference next Friday on the skills agenda, a skills summit, is looking at how do we make sure the local communities benefit as much as possible. So we change the hierarchy. Of these 100,000 jobs, the most go to local residents, the next lot go to UK residents, and the final tranche go to immigration, which is where you bring in your global leaders, and just turn that dynamic completely on its head. And I think that's what perhaps is the most important thing, to bring the communities along with us. And if we can do that and demonstrate the benefits across the whole of the region and other regions, then I think we'll win. If this is just seen as another high-level science and technology attempt to increase immigration or suck the rest of the UK dry of its scientists, then I don't think we will win. And I think we need to get that balance right with our communities.
Dan, what have I missed?
So I think building on the point Andy was making, there's once we've achieved this, the people are going to be working in the economy that is going to be possible because of everything that's being described here. But actually, to achieve this, we've got to build a lot of stuff. And that is a huge task, actually. You think in the Oxcam context, that's railways, theme park, reservoirs. You think then across the east of England and, Sizewell Sea, etc., all of the houses, the many thousands of houses across both the east of England and Oxcam, that's a huge task to mobilise the amount of people with the right skills to actually build it in the first place, to make all of the jobs in industry then possible for decades to come. Is there a plan to make sure that we have the amount of people with those skills to build all of this stuff in the same broad region at the same period of time? And is that plan doing enough to make sure that local communities get the opportunity to have those, whether it's like specialist welder to build railways or whatever it might be? So there's a big skills need. If there's not a plan, that's a problem for this. If we can't physically build it, that's a real problem. But it also presents an opportunity because it could be a chance to really skill up and provide opportunities to many people across many communities in the east of England and Oxcam. So I think it's sort of the point Andy was making about the sunny uplands that we're trying to get to requires a big lift over the next decade or more. And what's the plan to get the people with the right skills to do that bit?
Fantastic. I mean, I'll just sort of praise Dan a bit more because his contribution to our sort of skills policy and well-being event 2 weeks ago, or whenever you listen to it, people have asked me to turn that final panel into some kind of white paper. White paper was the phrase. I don't know if it's the right phrase, policy proposal, or we're also looking at, as I say, filming on location in Thetford Forest yesterday, talking about forest villages and forest towns, not necessarily Forest City 1, but on the Norwich-Cambridge route. But Andy, the final question is: what can Eastern promise? What can our listeners to this podcast, those who support us, who will be foursquare behind what you're trying to do? I am foursquare. We are foursquare at Eastern Promise behind what you're trying to do. How can we help you, you and Dan, do what you need to do to keep this sense of momentum? I've already registered my interest for the conference this year.
Okay.
I want to talk about that.
That makes sense. So we have a superpower conference each, I think it's June this year, where we bring together both leaders from the region, the UK and internationally as well, to discuss science and technology and actually how you can progress initiatives both regionally, nationally and across the globe. What can you do to support? I think it's mutual. The first thing is that I talked to Ros Bird about Cambridge. She's CEO at Norwich Research Park. So one thing, sort of get over it. There's too much of an obsession with particularly Cambridge. There's lots of great things going on in East Anglia which are great. I think what I said about capability, if you're looking for if you're looking for networks and links, then doing it through capability rather than through geography is much more interesting. As those from these things I have spoken to, I haven't forgot the East West Rail needs to end up in Norwich and Ipswich. So we are mutually happy to, as a supercluster board, we see the benefits of going both east and west from the current route, because what we're fundamentally talking about here, where I started, that National Infrastructure Commission identified infrastructure as being the biggest blocker to greater collaboration and greater connectivity across the region. So actually improving further east-west connectivity is really, really important. So the sooner we push the corridor out to Norwich and Ipswich, the better. In the meantime, see East-West Rail as a good starting point, that it does benefit the whole of the country and it benefits the areas outside of the near corridor. So basically, try and be nice to us. Try and not say that East-West.
Why would you be anything else?
Try no.
No, I'm serious though. What is the point? As he said, not shouting. What is the point of doing anything else?
There is. Well, I think the investment of East-West Rail, for sure, there are other places you could invest. East-West Rail is a choice by government to generate what it believes is the greatest economic benefit that can be done. What I'm telling you is that I think that is only the start of the network, and that network goes across the UK. But there will be, so I think being supportive of East-West Rail in itself is really helpful, because I think it demonstrates that understanding that it is networking and capability that brings us together. And there are parts of the country, Dan talks about, there are people in other parts of the country who are really supportive of East-West Rail because they get it. They get what it's for. It's the front door, it's the front window. It allows you to get into the whole of the UK, and the whole of the country should benefit, and we need to make sure it does.
And it'll be a great exemplar for other things going forward. And what we learn in doing East West Rail, I say we, the royal we, they can repeat in other places.
But I'm saying, and it's not East West Rail per se. It's how people ask me why don't I spend more time linking to London or Norwich or to Manchester? Because it's bloody hard work just joining Oxford to Cambridge together. And actually, their two areas are very, very similar in many ways. It's tough. It's hard work building a network. And so you're absolutely right. It's not so much the railway line. It's all the stuff that goes around it, getting the KI linked, getting the skills linked, making sure the housing's done in the right way, to get the mass market connectivity, to make sure the communities benefit from it, for making sure we maintain a quality of life. It's bloody hard work. So you're right, the learnings we make joining Oxford to Cambridge, we should be linking the whole of the UK, because the UK is not much bigger than a single US state. No. And you don't find US states, an individual US state, arguing amongst itself about where things go. It's because they connect themselves.
Do it once, we can do it twice. If you need us, we will be there. That's all I can say, really. Gentlemen, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much.
My huge thanks to Andy and Dan for their time and their patience, as well as to Sophie at Cambridge Ahead and Chanel at Innovate Cambridge for their help. By demonstrating that the East of England can collectively help the government to deliver on its priorities for the corridor, we will be in a much stronger position to benefit from the corridor once it's established. This is, I'm very pleased to say, something that appears to be very well understood, and Eastern Promise will also be travelling the corridor to bring you the thoughts and views from colleagues and partners in Milton Keynes and, of course, Oxford. And that is all there is for episode 154, our very first episode of 2026, our 5th anniversary year. I have been Mike Rigby, and I will be so again next week when I'll be holding a small summit of Norfolk's ambassadors. Drawn from various sectors across the county, these cheerleaders will be telling us what makes Norfolk so special to them, and also help me bust some myths about the county. Join me back here then, won't you? Until then, bye for now. To hear other episodes of the Eastern Promise podcast, and to find out more about what we do, go to our website at easternpromise.org.uk. Eastern Promise is a Pudding Shed production in proud association with Mills and Reeve, achieving more together.